Today we're going to look in depth at a problem of humanity and relate it to an individual who is suffering from the problem. I must remind you at the outset that as one of the persons participating in this workshop, seminar, you are expected, and you have already agreed in the earlier seminar, to be totally confidential in this matter. The information here is for your professional absorption. The nature of astrology is that in order to bring out important points, we sometimes have to be very, very personal. Sometimes the personal matters are of national importance, social importance, but still your confidence must reign. If the doctors can maintain their confidence, then you can certainly maintain yours. The information is for your professional advice and guidance. We're talking today about the subject of alcoholism. It is a subject that concerns nations, a subject that can impoverish families, that can destroy the ethics, the goodness of a family situation, where a father, and worse still, when a mother is an alcoholic, and in her desire to satisfy the urge to drink alcohol, she degrades the whole family as well as herself. And so the term alcoholic abuse is one that we use quite frequently. It's fairly new. It suggests that there is a destructive pattern in drinking alcohol. There is resulting damage to health, to careers, and to relationships. We can't get away from the fact that it is a drug, and that is important to astrologers because it means that the matter is drawn into the 12th house and into the Lord, the province of the Lord of the 12th house, which is Pluto, and to the sign of the zodiac of the 12th house, which of course is Pisces. It depresses the nervous system, which for some people is a supportive factor. It is invisible in its action quite frequently, right until the last stages, and is, as we know, a social problem. In practical terms, the central nervous system becomes over-receptive to the daily input of aggravations and provocations that we generally accept as part of our everyday living. There is therefore a physiological need to damp down the nervous system, to make it not quite so sensitive. And it is this that alcohol assists some people with. Some people don't need it at all. Some people enjoy it as one might an aspirin. Some people enjoy it as a kind of elixir, but they do not allow the alcohol to take over the personality. When you use the alcohol to enforce, to enhance, so it is good. But when it begins to take over habits and attitudes and is itself the holder of the whip, then it is regarded as alcoholic abuse. The spiritual side of man's nature has always been of great concern when alcohol is considered. Dionysus was the god who, in imbibing in alcohol, reached a stage in which he performed in such a way in his behavior as to incur the contempt of his fellows, of his siblings, of his fellow gods, if you like. And this was part, in ancient Rome and Greece, this was part of the initiation procedure to show that an individual, despite having imbibed in alcohol with his friends who are flopping around drunk, are able to contain their alcohol, to be master of themselves despite imbibing. Paracelsus is a good modernish example of a person who knew what his capacity was. And the books about Paracelsus continually eulogize him in respect of the fact that though he was living in an age of alcoholism, he yet retained a very clear mind, was never drunk, flopping around, falling about like an initiating Dionysus. He was somebody who had mastered this factor. If he drank on his own, well, it would be way up in the mountains, alone, possibly reinforcing him as he experimented, elaborating such things as homeopathy. An extraordinary person able to master such a drug as alcohol. We all know alcoholics, of course, because of the fame of their binges. A binge is when an alcoholic begins to do his thing every day, and maybe do it for several days, a weekend. Famous film called The Lost Weekend with Ray Milland in it. If you see it floating around in any of the video shops, get it. Put it on your shelf as a reference tape. It is the film of a nice, decent gentleman who goes on a binge for a weekend, hence the title, The Lost Weekend. You may also get a biography, perhaps, of Errol Flynn, who was the opposite of Ray Milland in The Lost Weekend. Errol Flynn was a hellraiser, and it was merely part of the binge procedure. Depends on who they are, but alcoholics tend to react in a binge in a particular way. When I started work as a boy of 15, we had an accountant who, to me, unaccountably, pardon the pun, would carry around a small briefcase. And naughty, I once opened it during a lunch break and found that instead of important papers belonging to the firm, there was a flat bottle of gin in it. And I had to ask a colleague, being so young myself, what the significance of the bottle of gin was. And I was told, and it helped me to understand this man and his problems. I was innocent at 15, though I must say occasionally I'd take a pull at my mother's bottle of brandy, which she always kept in the bottom of her wardrobe. Well, I was a normal person. But binges are bingers. Sometimes the binge person hides himself away, 12th house. Not only alcoholism, but hides himself away and does his thing alone, or does it with a companion. And they can be quite disgusting in their preparation for a binge weekend. You'll find that they will quite easily swipe things from people's homes, pawn anything that they can to turn their assets into cash so that the cash can be converted to enough bottles to see them through their weekend. All their goodness, their show of acceptability is swept overboard by the binge. It was Carl Jung, of course, who brought it home to the esoteric world that alcoholism, especially if it is there from birth, that alcoholism is, in his opinion, a thirst for spirit, a deep inner thirst for spirit, a pining for it. And as it is not usually convenient to indulge for various reasons, the approaching alcoholic will thirst for spirit and turn to alcohol in the absence of getting some kind of spiritual consolation. Alcoholics look for consolation. They look for a blunting of the central nervous system, for a dampening of their sensory nature, for something that can put them into a blotto state for a few days and make life easier. I've quoted Ray Milland and his Lost Weekend. I've also mentioned Paracelsus, the initiate. I've mentioned the accountant who I worked with for years and years, firstly not knowing and then knowing that he was an alcoholic. And we also have the example of our particular chart here today that we're going to investigate. But there are many illustrious examples. You should not get it into your head that an alcoholic is a person whose mind is diminished in some way. He's not a fool usually. He can be as intelligent as you. He can be an intellectual. There are illustrious examples of those alcoholics who have won Nobel Prizes, especially for English literature. 5 were known to be alcoholics when I last investigated their problem. John Steinbeck, who gave us The Grapes of Wrath. Interestingly, in it there is the role of the female breast plays a strong part, where a woman with enlarged breasts is able to feed a starving man in the difficulties that arose in California in the early days of the century and the latter of the last century. Ernest Hemingway, probably the foremost novelist of the 20th century, was also secretly, 12th House, was also an alcoholic. He wrote, in my opinion, probably the best book, certainly the most sensible book, For Whom the Bell Tolls, fringing on the esoteric most of the time, as he covers, almost like a journalist, he covers the Spanish Civil War. And in the great love scene, he talks about an esoteric factor that is sometimes noted by esoteric people, that when they have an experience in full waking consciousness, it seems as if the whole earth moves. It's as if time for you has jolted backwards, or jolted into the future, or something spatial has happened. Wonderful book. Eugene O'Neill, the brilliant playwright, one of the brilliant playwrights of the 20th century, he was one. Sinclair Lewis, who is today in incarnation, about 35, known to us, and doing quite well. Inherited a fortune which has made his life easier, but whether the temptation to therefore indulge in alcohol will overtake him now that he is past middle age, or going into middle age, I should say, we'll have to see. And William Faulkner, the RAF pilot from World War I, who wrote books on social and racial problems. They were all Nobel Prize winners, but they were also, of course, alcoholics. I'm not going to go into the matter of statistics. You can look those up for yourself, and they change vastly from generation to generation on this subject. Another esoteric factor, of course, is that which we call delirium tremens. Delirium tremens, where the alcohol affects the opening of the outer major chakra, the Ajna chakra. The outer major chakra is in the neck, coinciding with the carotid gland. The Ajna chakra coincides with the sacred square inch between the brows, and is sometimes related severely to the matter of delirium tremens, where there is overstimulation of the anterior pituitary gland, and whereas it may give some spurt to spiritual growth and sometimes assist in intellectual development, in the case of chronic abuse of alcoholism, it can affect the outer major chakra so that it does not open in coordination with the thousand-petaled lotus and the outer major center. The result is distorted inner vision, and the distorted inner vision leads to what is known as delirium tremens. And delirium tremens means, from the esoteric point of view, a preview, an ability to look into the lowest planes of the astral world, what we might call astral jungles, where animals, distorted humans, who have grown into the very vices that they hold most precious, can be seen by this psychotic person or vision. I'm not going to go into Korsakoff's psychosis. It's a syndrome which you can look up for yourselves. I'm going to now describe something of the character before coming into give the astrological interpretation of the example today. The example. A brilliant young man, now in his mid-30s, with a tremendous superficial charm. I'm giving you these factors so that you might be able to identify them later in the horoscope that we're going to give out to you. He has gone through tremendous difficulties, beginning with his parents, who were, and still are to a great extent, religious fanatics. And their religious fanaticism was implanted in their son up until the age of 15 or 16, when the natural narcissism of youth began to draw him into objects that were not religiously fanatic. And so he slowly broke away from the parentage. Today, we have a lot more to understand about him. Today he is a person that cannot hold a job very easily unless it has loose rules and regulations. He can't stick at a job like working in carpentry or plumbing or anything like handiwork. Once the clock strikes 4 and the sun begins to dip, he is called away by his problem to go to the pubs, and there he will end his day drinking, usually beer, with whoever is there. Superficial attractiveness, literally qualified academically. The alcoholic abuse, however, has changed his literary qualifications into intellectual arrogance. He is an intellectual snob when he's drunk. And when he's drunk, he seeks companionship. And the companionship is, first of all, with students at a local student village, and thereafter he seeks out and usually finds professors, staff of the university, and drinks with them, and his ideas are elevated in that way. And indeed, he was able to get a job at London University teaching poetry. So there was nothing wrong with his mind, with his academic ability, just the curse of alcoholism. There were, however, police incidents in his life. He had problems, especially when under the influence. He had a viciousness which he turned towards women. Because he was always short of money, he would prey upon women students, and when desperate, would move in with them and live off them and quarrel with them, and sometimes get involved in police shindigs with regard to them. He would alienate himself from his friends because of the way he acted when he was alcoholic. Coarse behavior would emerge. That would mean you must look at Mars. And if Mars is in the 12th house there, and note that it is intercepted in Taurus, then you must give this pause to think about. Coarse behavior and boorishness. He became too inflated for his original friends, who did whatever they could to avoid him. He took up animal companionship, making friends with a huge white rat that he allowed to run around Claregate College. He had the ability, watch the 12th house again, he had the ability to win the heart and soul of dogs. And the dogs would suffer when they were removed from his presence. So intense was his attractive capacity for animal companions. He had, of course, the usual alcoholic problem of being impervious to friends' advice. And when you see an intercepted sign, in the horoscope with planets in it, you must suspect a great degree of inhibition, a great degree of confinement of abilities. And we will see that this horoscope has got 4 intercepted signs. They are Taurus and its opposite, which is Virgo, and Pisces with its opposite, got them round the wrong way, Taurus with its opposite Scorpio, intercepted, and Pisces with its opposite, which is Virgo, intercepted. And these are together and suggest that there is a part of his life which is hugely inhibited. And when he comes out of his coarseness, he is able to look with remorse at the way he has conducted himself at university, with old friends, and unfortunately also with the matter of marriage. In order to fit into the demands of his alcoholism, he marries a girl who is part of a student body, Natus, Sagittarius, on the cusp of the house of marriage. Note also that the Earth, which is the ruler of Sagittarius, on the cusp of the house of marriage, brings students into the matter of marriage. He marries a girl from abroad, Sagittarius, on the cusp of the 7th house. Marries a girl from abroad, a Danish girl. They have a child, and his behavior forces her to leave him and bring the child up in a separate household. He returns to England and obtains his literary degrees. Before that, he was attempting to take an English literature degree in a Danish university, if you could think of anything so absurd. Merely, I'm pointing it out to show you that alcoholics will frequently try and bend their lives, their their relationships in such a way as to make them conform to the alcoholic pattern, the alcoholic framework, the alcoholic attitudes. Such an interesting subject. And you are bound as astrologers to be confronted by alcoholics who do not wish their problem to be aired in orthodox circles. They have bizarre behavior, of course. In this particular horoscope, we have Uranus in the 5th house, very close to Pluto and the Moon, and the Pluto's retrograde, and the behavior is loud and the behavior is eccentric. The retrograde is flung on to Uranus, and so the eccentricity comes over very loud indeed. He seeks out vulnerable companions, especially amongst the student community. He neglects his dress, his behavior. He neglects his dress and acts out certain roles, like New Age roles. Even though I warned him, the staff of the university might think you are fresh and interesting and accept the way you are dressed. They will come for you one day if you dress in that way in front of a student class in literature. And so, with regard to sexuality, with regard to the food that he ate and his dress, he was neglectful. He has got, if you will look at the horoscope, Saturn retrograde in an intercepted Pisces in the 11th house, which suggests the interception is not there because this is a birth chart, but Saturn becomes intercepted in the progress chart. He has cold feet, and occasionally the cold feet would be attendant upon massive depression. Alcoholic remorse, we call it, alcoholic remorse. And when these things coincide, the personality can reach down into the very depth, into the natal. So underneath he had a faint heart and lacked confidence. He would adopt postures. I think Venus, all right, I think that Venus progresses into Taurus, but even with Mars and Jupiter there, Mars and Jupiter related, especially when they are square or malefic to each other, give you ridiculous situations. Laughable, ha 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 ha, that's Jupiter, and Mars, boisterousness. And they produce ridiculous situations. Mars square to Jupiter, ridiculous situations. I've had a few in my life, and he certainly has had some in his. Posturing as a poet, when in fact he himself could not write poetry, but an excellent critic of poetry. We sometimes find that in society, that people who make good critics are often unable to produce art. Their critical ability is fine, sensitive, sharp, but does not allow them to have the productive capacity themselves. The marriage was a disaster. The son has grown into adolescence, but is still in the custody of the mother. Again, remember that the 7th house is the house of custody. It's the house of law, and he is affected in that way. It was my conclusion that he had a fascination for animals that enabled him to entrap them. And to make them virtually his slaves. They would drop their masters or their original owners to come to him. And then, of course, he would leave the scene and the animal was worse for it. He was frequently at loggerheads with his parents, only to embrace them again when he needed money. When he needed money or a favor or a roof over his head. Beneath it all, there is a very fine person, immensely courageous. He alone, well, not alone, but certainly he on his own, was able to climb the high fir tree here, the Norfolk fir, a height of what must be at least 150 feet, 100 to 150 feet, and to take part in the film of Paracelsus as a stuntman, virtually, without any experience. His action upon people around him was, you could only take a little of him at a time. You could have him with others to dinner, you could stand him a drink in a pub, you could converse with him, but only so much at a time. Perhaps this is related to one of the interceptions. The factor of alcoholism meant that he could reinforce himself sometimes. We call it, amongst non-alcoholics, we call it Dutch courage. Dutch courage. The ability to fight, especially in World War, Sagittarius, to be able to, and the 7th house rules Holland, Dutch courage to fight in a war as a volunteer, even though you are nauseated by war, disgusted by it, yet to volunteer and fight. He will persist with friendships. He will regard it as a great tragedy if he lost a friend, either by death or by the friend refusing to have anything more to do with him. Some of the ways in which alcoholism reinforces is in this list I'm going to give you. It reduces anxiety, and alcoholics, whether it's before or after the actual binge, alcoholics tend to suffer from angst, A-N-G-S-T, angst, which is a precursor of extreme stress. Sin not to ask for whom the bell tolls, as Hemingway quotes in his book, For Whom the Bell Tolls. The bell is tolling for you. Part of you is dead. Part of you has died if you neglect to help an alcoholic. I do well with depressed people. We're all different. I do well with depressed people, but I do very poorly with alcoholics. And if I can, I prefer to take a depressed person than an alcoholic as a form of service in my life. And so the alcohol reduces their anxiety. It reduces their inhibitions and moral restraints, and this guy has severe emphasis on religion. Neither Catholicism, not Catholicism, and this is the house of Catholicism, nor in Protestantism, and this is the house of Protestantism. And of course, they are opposite each other and here intercepted. So the religious attitudes of the parents when he was young, in my opinion, helped set the process of alcoholism on its way. Remember also that the 12th house is responsible, if I can remember it, for 3 factors that prevail in the lives of people who are vulnerable or at risk. It is the house of the spiritualist medium. It is the house, very frequently, of the 6th ray physical body. It is the house also of mythology, myth, legend. It is the house of drugs, and it is the house of alcoholism. So when you have a 6th ray physical body, which means a physical brain, then you must always question to see if there isn't a sort of subverse leaning towards those factors that I have just mentioned to you. And remember, this is the house also of institutionalism, the house of the lunatic asylum, the house where people surrender themselves to be taken out of an alcoholic condition or a drug addiction. And so you can see here from this young man's horoscope that he was severely at risk from an early age, and the parentage involved in trying to think of the name of the religion. 12th? No.
Not Mormon.
Not Mormons, something very close.
Seventh-day Adventists.
Seventh-day Adventists, there you have it. Which contributes to the weirdness, contributes to the alcoholism, contributes to the receptiveness of a medium. And so we have the payoffs of alcoholism. Why do they do it? Well, they may not know why they're doing it, but the fact remains that the sundowner is perfectly ordinary in hot countries like Central Africa, what was northern and southern Rhodesia and South Africa and Egypt and places like that. You took alcohol in the afternoons, late, when the sun had dipped or was dipping, and conditions were cooler and more pleasant. You took it because it vasodilated your blood system. It meant that your blood now flowed into the periphery, and there you were cooled down much easier. And it has that kind of effect on people also sometimes who are alcoholically inclined. It has a tranquilizing effect for the alcoholic. It is a sad belief that it increases the sexual appetite. Shakespeare agreed with this, but said, yes, it increases the sexual appetite, but messes up the performance. And I'm afraid amongst men that is true. In women, alcoholics, the sexual part of it is much more likely to end up as a howling match, crying drunk. Perhaps some of you know better than I do in that respect. Of course, it tends to produce difficulties as well. It reinforces camaraderie. When men get together and have alcohol, it's best for women to withdraw and seek their own company. A remnant of this is, of course, having dinner with the high and mighty, where the booze consumed at the dinner table excited the men, and in such company the women withdrew from the dining room in earlier days and would seek their own company while the men recovered and went through their camaraderie together. Dutch courage. I can remember the huge truckloads of alcohol arriving on the battlefield at Alamein before the first night. And you could get as much Cyprus brandy as you wanted to fill your water bottles or extra bottles and so on before the actual action began. I say this because I won't be hurting as many people as I might, but it is a great help towards establishing camaraderie. It was something in the war also that when you were in a desert, you didn't always have alcohol available, but when it did come up to the front line and was shared out, we found that all having a drink together as a group, that somehow or the other it had a catharsis effect. It would bring out in a group all the emotional stresses and strains. And if there was community singing by the group, the effect of this was that the next day and for several days after, the emotional tension, stresses and strains of friendships and hostilities were all melted away by this particular factor. And I think even nations have had to realize this. They turn shyness into self-confidence. The ability to speak out. If you're an introvert, well, introverts do well if they are ready for it. They can drink together with a friend or with friends and spill the beans. Things they wouldn't dream of talking about will come out under the influence of alcohol. And these are what we call, in medicine anyway, we call them the reinforcers of alcohol. They are, from the alcoholic's point of view, the gifts that alcohol brings to them. I found, I must say, in my student days, medical, humanities, other studies, I found that a glass of brandy, 2 tops perhaps, before studying, gave you an attitude of, how can I describe it now, I've forgotten the words for it. It gave you the Helen and made you stick to your intention of studying that night. And for me, it was a great help in that respect. Not with other things, but in that respect. From an esoteric point of view, there are those who do believe that just the smallest amount of alcohol has the effect of increasing the flow of images that present themselves in the sacred square inch between the brows. Now, I can't guarantee that for everyone, but certainly there is a stimulation of the anterior pituitary gland. It also begins to turn your ideas into action. The ideas that you may have been having, now you have the Dutch courage to take them a stage further. It's all right to talk about it, but can you put your money where your mouth is? And that's in this horoscope here. When he was drunk, tight, he was able to take action, at least in his mind. Now then, let's look at this extraordinary person, do a summing up of, because I have revelations to make, which are horrific. Let's sum his character up. He turns away from anyone showing him love and compassion. You must know people who are like that. Cannot bear to be fussed, which is a form of female compassion. Do not like to be fussed. Turn away from anyone who shows them love and compassion, and won't hesitate to disappoint them and disgust them, so that their compassion makes them withdraw rather than face that sort of behavior. He did become a lecturer in English poetry, but was not a poet, to my knowledge, ever. He did secure degrees, which one must pay him credit for. There were police episodes, which I'm going to describe, only because of the necessity to present the astrology of the individual as correctly as possible. An affinity for animals, which must suspect that he may have had a third-ray soul. A third-ray soul. I've got the ray somewhere, but yes. No, he has a third-ray personality, and had the ability to take on a huge diversity of things and do them well, In Paracelsus, he undertook the building of sets, the painting of sets. He undertook the most dangerous parts in the film. He was I'm trying to get the word now, attractive person to view, that he was often put into different roles with just a change of disguise. This is the kind of person he was when I knew him, along with most of the guys in this group. Yes. It is surprising what he was prepared to do. He was a great user. Capricorn rules people who are users. He was a merciless user, and he could plot his uses, abuses, and misuses well in advance. The wife and child in Denmark have been used, and there is no compassion about that. He's a Greenpeace type that seizes on projects and fits in well doing them and then drops them very quickly. His previous life, His previous life was in America. He was a very well-known writer who used to isolate himself. He was crazy about nature. He's the kind of person that would have pleased Gerard Manley Hopkins, who wrote Invis Maid and said in his poetry, "What would the world be once bereft of wet and wildness? Oh, let them be left, the wildness and wet. Long live the weeds and the wilderness yet." I think I played some part in directing him into literature and especially into poetry. He was a good critic of poetry, and he still retains that. His parents fortunately decamped for most of his young life to Australia and got involved there. We must not forget the nature of karma where there is alcoholism, the nature of karma. Your perception of the horoscope will show you that long-standing karma is represented by Saturn. Look at it. In Pisces, the house of booze, the sign of booze. Long-standing karma in Pisces, in the 11th house of friends and hopes and wishes. And we're going to look at the karmic factor in due course. Notice also short-term karma, which is Mars intercepted in Taurus in the 12th house. Don't forget other factors of the 12th house is the agent provocateur, the one who can cause immense trouble through violence or the plotting of violence, Guy Fawkes, the plotting of violence, and also it is the house of secret enemies who plot your undoing, and all that is included in this chart. The most important factor here, though, is that Saturn conveys responsibility. Saturn conveys responsibility. And the great problem with alcoholics and karma is that they have shirked responsibility in previous lives. They go into isolation to get away from the hurly-burly of their dharma, of their obligation. They hide themselves. And these characteristics come out in such a person as this. And we will be considering that in a moment. We're going to consider now further the extraordinary life of this alcoholic who periodically cuts his own head off and rushes around like a beheaded chicken, when in fact he is in an alcoholic state. I'm going to relate 3 episodes in his life which are reflected in the horoscope. Very, very serious events, enough to attract the attention of the police, and on which matters I'm not going to give any further comment except to relate what they were about. Firstly, he had this attitude towards women which had probably emerged from the association with his wife, and also from the fact that he had quite a lot of experience of universities. Note that in the 6th house he has got the planet Earth, the ruler of Sagittarius, in Sagittarius in the 6th. So he has been marked considerably by his university life. He therefore begins to avail himself of this student association. Friends of his, those who have shared digs with him, confirm that this was one of his practices. Drinking as heavily as he was, and therefore always short of money, he would prey upon women students. He would move in with them, as I've already said, so that the student became the landlady. He would offer favors, sometimes take them, and then leave when it suited him. He was in these states, usually supported by alcohol, and he would be what I would call, by a word that has gone out of fashion now, a cad, just a simple cad, seizing on whatever he could to persist with his brutalized life. Then 2 episodes occurred which must have shaken him vastly. He apparently came into contact with a student from abroad, whether it was by design or by chance. And this girl was on her way to Ireland. She was found murdered in Ireland a few days after he said he had left her, and the police had him in for questioning. He gave all the details he could. It turns out that he had gone with her and taken the ferry to Ireland with her. And then they had parted, and he had an idea that she was going to catch a lift from a truck driver in Ireland. The police persisted with their inquiries because they had no other leads. I was questioned because my name was mentioned as being the principal of Claregate College, and I gave a straightforward review of what I knew of him, and the matter was dropped. A few months later, he had met another girl, also a student, and he had recorded his meeting with her in his spiritual diary. she also was murdered sometime after she had left him, doing whatever it was she had come over, she was intending to do in that vacation period. Again, more questions. Again, nothing resulting from it, but the case being kept open for as long as possible. To my knowledge, today, there still has been no solving of those two murders. Then, by coincidence, a group of Claregate students took a car, one of the college students' cars, and they went out for the evening to Marlow. And Marlow is famous for the fact that it has got walkways next to the river Thames, and that these walkways occasionally are flooded to ankle depth. They presumably had smoked one or two reefers and had drunk together, and the alcoholic was one of them. One of the men, one of the guys from the college, disappeared. When the others came back to the college, they reported to me that Jim Sauer was missing. They didn't know where he was. And later that day, police called and reported that a body had been found in the flooded area running next to the river. The person had drowned in 3 inches of water. It was suspected that he had been on drugs. All of the party were questioned severely. I had to remonstrate with the police because of the excessive attention involving students of the college. The background of Pete Sauer, the student who died, was that his mother had married a second time, and the husband, the new husband, was inclined occasionally to drink and to beat her up. When this happened, she would call Pete, her son, ask him to come down and stay with her when her new husband was being troublesome. It was believed by me that he had been called down to her at Marlow, which was the family home, and he had gone there to give her succor and support in her difficulties. The fact remains that somehow or the other he died in mysterious circumstances. And our alcoholic was involved in the whole matter. And again was with the others up for questioning. Pete Sauer was a remarkable person. He was a famous poet and the author of Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll was the pen name. I have got a stack of Pete Sauer's papers to show that he was emerging from a traumatic childhood and was beginning to have extraordinary visual experiences and had begun to write these experiences down as poetry. So these three factors tended to push our subject into anxiety states and may have precipitated his alcoholic abuse. What I'm now going to do is to ask you to go to your volume 2 of the dictionary, and we're going to look at some of the aspects that the horoscope of this guy has revealed. He was a very spiritual person. I know it sounds difficult, impossible, but that was the circumstance. And he had extraordinary lapses, growths, burgeoning into spiritual comment. And you have heard me talk about a certain spiritual event as an analogy to the subject of abortion. In the 1930s, the whole subject of abortion was taboo. Anybody who performed abortion was prosecuted. It was just not allowed at all. I was a kid of 12 at the time, and suddenly the whole city of Durban became engrossed in a news event. And the news event was that a Dr. Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, a Dr. Knight had been picked up by the police and charged with procuring abortions. And he was harassed by society in general for having done such a terrible thing, that is, procuring abortions for women who wanted them. The police had put him in a cell, and a few hours later he was found dying because he had taken, being a doctor, he had taken an overdose. Pinned to him by himself was a note which quoted the 2 lines from a very famous poem which I have got upstairs and often quoted in my lectures and talks. And the poem ends, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." And was meant to say, no, you're not going to take hold of my life because of what I believe in. I'm the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. It's a famous quotation which has been quoted many times by people in desperate circumstances. I suppose it's the equivalent in a totally different way of Frank Sinatra's song, "I Did It My Way." So that was the observation of Dr. Knight, and I've often quoted it in my lectures. And this person, this alcoholic, was aware of that, and he would often quote it. The point I'm making is that in the horoscope of this alcoholic, there is referred in the dictionary one of the aspects which includes this quotation, "I'm the master of my fate, the captain of my soul." So I'm going to leave that for the moment and come back to it later on. Now I want to refer you to Volume 2, which you've got in front of you, page 166. 166. In doing the horoscope, this horoscope, 166, I want you to go to the bottom on the left-hand side of page 166, and you will see there Vulcan in Taurus in the 12th, which refers, of course, to our horoscope. And the horoscope shows quite clearly that there is Vulcan, I'm pointing to it now, Vulcan in Taurus intercepted in the 12th house. And if you look at the bottom, you will see the words, "Out of the dark comes the scream of a woman unknown." Can you put your finger on it? At the last paragraph on the left, which is headed by Vulcan in Taurus in the 12th, which is an aspect from the horoscope on the board. And it reads, "Out of the dark comes the scream of a woman unknown." That is one of the permutations of Vulcan in Taurus in the 12th. What else might it suggest? Vulcan and Taurus in the 12th.
What are the other things?
Might suggest strangulation.
Mm-hmm.
And strangulation is most likely to produce a scream. And when you look at these aspects in the dictionary, you will find this kind of confirmation of the events in the alcoholic's life. That 3 dead persons occurred in his life all within a few years, and they were suggested by this aspect. And this is choked to death. 12th house is the end of life. And in the 12th house you will find again that there is the sun, which is life. The 12th house is the end of life. Taurus is choking, and the process produces a scream. And this is how you learn to use the dictionary. If you have an aspect, you must look it up you must read the whole content of where the reference of the aspect is made, read it through, and then you must cursor. If you're talking about an ear, nose and throat specialist, otorhinolaryngology, if you're talking about an ear, nose and throat specialist, you cursor through the different permutations that are given, and obviously there are those that would have nothing to do with a surgeon or with the ear, nose and throat. If you are dealing with a peasant, you're not going to talk about his university career. And so cursoring is one of the processes in which you go down a list of the permutations, and you say which of these permutations could possibly refer to my client. My client, who is a specialist doctor of ear, nose and throat. And so you throw out a lot of the permutations. And that is what you need to do, is consider all of the content of the dictionary. Now, I can't give you, as a doctor of medicine, I can't give you my opinion as to the nature of those three deaths. But I have an opinion, and my opinion is greatly founded upon the astrological interpretation of these aspects. So now we're going to go to another aspect from the in the dictionary. Have a look at Venus retrograde. I've got it up on the board. Venus retrograde in Gemini in the 1st, related to Mars and Gemini in the 12th, both in opposition to Neptune retrograde in Scorpio intercepted in the 6th with Libra on the cusp. Underneath I have chalked in the interpretation of this, and it reads there, held by police under suspicion of 2 murders and questioned. All right, let's we'll have you up, Paul, to act as scribe. In that middle aspect, I want you please to, yes, I want you please to suggest where there is questioned in astrological clips. Can you come over here? Okay. The middle one. Where is questioning?
Questioning is...
What is the house of questioning?
Sixth.
The 6th house, yeah? So will you put 6th up over question? We are now doing what is called parsing.
Questions.
Yes. The 6th house is the house of questioning. What suggests the police there? 2 things.
Yes. We have Libra on the cusp.
Libra, yes, Libra on the proximal cusp of the 6th house. So put it over police. Yeah. What is the house of suspicion?
12th.
The 12th house is the house of suspicion, yes. Now look at the 12th house, and yeah, it's really a suspicion of violence, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Where would you see violence there? Yes, Mars, and what is related to Mars there?
Mars. Venus related.
What does Mars rule?
Mars is violence. So
Yes, Scorpio intercepted. Mars is related to Scorpio intercepted. So I'm going to ask you to write at the end there, after question, over violence. And question over violence. Over murder. Put murder. Yes, murder's better. It's more apropos. All right, now where is there murder? Anybody?
Mars in opposition to Neptune.
Mars in opposition to Neptune.
Neptune.
Yes, that's murder. Put it in. Good. Where have you got two murders now? Put it in. Yes, Gemini over 2. That's it. Murders you've just done, repeat it. You could use Mars if you wanted. That's it. What suggests held there?
Held is
Well, the best held is in the horoscope. Hang on a second. This is held, all this.
Taurus.
So you're entitled to put in there opposition to Scorpio, put Taurus, dash, 4 planets in Taurus, 4 PLs in Taurus, held. And it's in the 12th house. Held, and what would the 12th house be? It would be a police station. Would be a police station, yes. What else is missing there? What's under suspicion? Interception.
Interception.
Put it over. Under, that's it. Under suspicion.
Under.
Yes, under suspicion of 2 murders. Yes. And why not put Taurus, 4 planets in Taurus, interception for the first word? You can see that it's all there, that this aspect, which takes the 12th house. I just wondered why I put Venus retrograde. Anybody got an idea?
Maybe it's in the progress chart?
Yes.
Is it the progress
It's on the
chart?
progress.
Have a look at your,
Yes, it is.
yeah, right. Did anybody notice that Venus in the first house produces a very fair person? Very fair person. And this person has got Venus and Gemini in the first. Yes.
You should put a P up there, shouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just read that.
It's progressed, yeah.
Does it,
Right,
so, I have a question.
Who would like to have a go at the first quotation? Yes, Mick.
No, I have a question.
Yes, do that.
Okay. So, if Venus is in Gemini in the first, and this is his progressed chart, does that mean he's a fair person now?
Does that mean what?
He's a fair person now.
I get your point. Yes, he is. Yes, there's been no alteration of the status. I think another person that has got the same fact as Mrs. Thatcher, very fair person, first house qualities. You could look at it sometime. All right, who would like to have a go at parsing the first? Yes. I'm the master of my ship. I've changed the quote a bit, but I've called it the master of my ship. It could be fate, but is there anything suggestive of a ship there?
Jupiter.
Jupiter, put Jupiter down. What kind of a ship is it? Could be a submarine because it's deep down, hidden underwater, but it's a wooden ship, isn't it? Yes, it's a wooden ship, just with a high prow. This is what I'm trying to get you must understand, that esoteric astrology is teaching you higher manas, abstract thinking. And to me, it's very easy. It's very easy for me to see Jupiter as a ship with a high prow. You see a high prow? A high prow of the ship. And it could be in forbidden waters, it could be in illegal waters. But that is what is being suggested there. Jupiter in Taurus in the 12th, it could be on a canal, and the canal could be a narrow canal. Where would you have a boat with a high prow and a canal? See, you guys are sticky when it comes to abstract. Venice! What do you have in Venice?
They're called gondolas, aren't they?
Water
Gondolas, yes. So you could interpret that as a gondola. It could be the song. There once was, no, not that one. Dennis the Menace from Venice, a gay gondolier with no rings in his ear, he will sing you a song as he paddles along his gondola. You may think that's mad, but that's the sort of background to esoteric astrology. Some of the deepest rooted memories that you have are related to songs your mother sang to you. Fairy tales and songs. And what do we call the songs? Nursery rhymes, and they were sung. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clements. Those are the strongest memories and most persistent memories you've got. And when you're doing esoteric astrology, that's what you're beginning to unearth. The nature of the unconscious. The 12th house is the nature of the unconscious. Yes. I am the master. Where's I am there? Yes. I am, and also Aries on the... All right, put it in, please. Mercury, I am. And put in Aries on the distal cusp is also I am. What would you suggest? Who is the spiritual master there? Now you know what it's like for me
I
to
know.
operate. Yeah.
I've just seen
Who
that.
is the spiritual master there? Screams at you. Neptune retrograde in Scorpio
Scorpio
intercepted. All right, shove that in. I'll accept that. But I'd also put in Mercury. Yes, put it in. Spiritual master, that's how we see it anyway. Of my ship, which is Jupiter. What sign of the zodiac rules my? Not yours, mine. Taurus. My possessions, my money. And so where you've got my ship, it's the Taurus part of that aspect. Jupiter in Taurus in the 12th. Yes. I am again, you repeat. Yes, second line. No, I am.
Oh, yes.
What's likely to be the captain of the ship? Mercury conjunct Jupiter, the captain. Would you agree with that? The boss, the leader, the director of the ship? And where is Sol? Tell me from the blackboard, where is Sol? From the blackboard, where is Sol? Gemini rising is the soul. The ascendant is always the soul. So put it in, please. Gemini ascendant. And what is my Taurus again? See, there's a Victorian flavour there. Yes. And I know it's in the dictionary somewhere. I've got the wrong reference there. Now have a look at the bottom one. All of you have a look at your horoscope and tell me who is the mother in this horoscope.
Sun.
See?
Sun.
You've got to have your wits about you, haven't you? All right. Dave Roberts, you tell me who's the mother.
The sun.
The sun, yes. The sun is the mother, and she's in Gemini in the 12th. Yes, mother. Can you give her Gemini 12? Because all that's the mother. Religious is 12th house, and Virgo, both of them. Religious, fanatic.
So
Is-
we want
Yes,
to-
yes. While he's doing that, all of you see if you can find the weirdo in this chart. Well, they are, you know, the sort of thing, don't let the child have a doctor to see him. Let him rather die. If the Lord wants him to die, let him die. If the Lord doesn't want him to die, then the Lord will save him, not a doctor. I want you to look at your charts and tell me where you see a weirdo. Well, I know what I would look for.
Uranus retrograde.
Uranus retrograde. Tell me where there is a Uranus retrograde.
Conjunct Pluto retrograde.
Pardon?
Conjunct Pluto retrograde.
Uranus retrograde. Why is it retrograde? What's throwing its retrograde onto Uranus? Have a look at the chart.
Because it's weird, strange.
Pluto retrograde in Virgo natally is close enough to influence Uranus. And so that's the weirdo aspect of it. Now what's the relationship between the mother and the weirdo?
Sun.
Uranus, yes. It is what? In conjunct? Never mind.
No, it's out
South
of.
Pole.
It's out of in conjunction.
So how did we put it down?
Related.
How did we put that down? Can you see that there anywhere?
Yeah, we can put Uranus here in conjunct to.
I would,
Pluto.
yes, but I would put the Libra on the cusp, distal cusp
Right.
of the 5th. So Pluto retrograde, Libra in the distal cusp.
So that's the proximate, isn't it? So
No, that's distal.
that's this thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
put it over
So you want to
weirdo.
put that on.
Fanatical is Aries.
Okay. So we put Libra on distal cusp.
Now this is, of course, the most abstruse astrology you can imagine. You're talking about a life in which the person is alcoholic, he's hiding himself, he's under suspicion, he comes out with weird statements. There's all sorts of difficulties here, complicated by 3 deaths in quick succession, which have the police, they don't know what to say or do. All right? You can sit down. Thank you. Now let's look at the chart that you've got and tell me or point to any places where you think there is evidence of alcoholism. Anywhere in the horoscope where you think there is evidence of alcoholism. If you like, we can take beer to start with. I've got drinking beer with dons, that's professors, and students between 6 and 8 o'clock at night. All of you put your finger on the house, which represents 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night. There's your midheaven.
The 7th house.
There's your 6 till 8 o'clock at night.
Yes.
Sunrise, watch. This is very, very important if you want to do accurate prognostication. That's 6 o'clock in the morning, sunrise. That's why that's called the soul, because it's the most potent position for a sign to be when you are born. So 6 a.m. till 8 a.m. 2 hours, 12 segments of the zodiac, 2 hours in each, makes 24. And so here you have got sunrise, sunset, after sunset, horizon, sunrise, sunset, after sunset. After or round about sunset you have got beer, which gives off an effervescence. Beer. And here you have got students, dons, professors, students, college, drinking beer almost as a food but making you silly.
And the danger of it, the earth.
Yes, the danger of making a meal out of your beer. And where's Mars? Take a look at Mars.
12th house in Taurus intercepted.
Mars is related to natal Mars is an opposition, is it?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. And natal Mars is in Taurus, which means raucous talking, raucous conversation with boozers. Between 6 and 8 at night becomes habitual. Scorpio intercepted as habitual. And it's a habit he can't break. All right, now swing your attention. Now swing your attention to Mars in Pisces again.
Saturn in Pisces.
Saturn.
Saturn in Pisces, yes. Saturn in Pisces again. Did we do anything with this, Joe?
No, not yet. I could run them off. I'll do it during the break.
Well, I'm hamstrung now, so without a progress chart.
Well, we have the progress charts.
All right, look at your own horoscopes then. Tell me why you think there are 3 kinds of heavy karma or chronic karma there. Saturn is heavy karma, especially if it's afflicted. Put your finger on natal Saturn. Natal Saturn, yes. Now put your finger on progressed Saturn, which has gone retrograde. And his good karma is helping him through the middle age part of his life. So Saturn retrograde relieves the heavy karma. And when you take them both together, they are neutral. You're not going to get very far in this person's chart looking at his karma. Yes. Now look at Mars. What does Mars and the Sun suggest in terms of an object of desire? Try motorbike. Somebody tell me why Mars and the Sun and the 12th house is a secret desire of his. Would you like to write up something there for me and say secret desire?
Over here?
Yes, by all means. Secret desire, that's 12th house over secret. 12th house over secret. Desire is what? Mars, good. Secret desire for two-wheeled, I've got to break it down for you. I wouldn't do it for myself, but I'm breaking it down for you because I'm trying to make it easy. Where's two? Gemini. Wheels. Sun. Two-wheeled. And a machine. Something that makes a loud noise. Bop, 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 bop. That's motorbike. Yeah, the secret is two-wheeled, a machine. Machine. Machine is Mars.
Machine, okay.
Yeah. Really, I've left a word out. To purchase a machine. A two-wheeled. Secret desire to purchase. Secret desire, arrow up in the middle or down. Yeah.
In my case, down.
Yes. Say to purchase. And that's Taurus. And you'll never get anything clearer than that. So when he's about 16, he begs, borrows to get hold of a motorbike, and he whizzes around the country, and he stops at Cheltenham where he sees a poster which talks about an esoteric meeting, and he comes to his first lecture, Claregate lecture, in Cheltenham. Thereafter he follows the lecture around the country, wherever he is going to lecture, Birmingham, why have I got Snowdon in my mind? What's the name of the town near to Bath? Swindon.
Swindon.
Yes, Swindon.
Yeah.
And he attends talks in these different places. They're college talks. So the talks are where? College talks. Yeah, college talk. Anyway, there are talks there, and he keeps it quiet from his parents. He keeps it quiet from his parents.